Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. It is that time again for a monthly reading wrap-up and TBR. Today we're going to talk all about what I read in May and what I'm hoping to read in June, so my TBR to be read. So we're going to start with what I read in May first. I did pretty good this month again on my TBR. I read all but one book and then I also read an additional book. So I read the correct amount, I just didn't get through all the books that I was hoping to get through. Also, just thought I'd mention really quick, the background's different. I don't have any of the physical books with me right now. And that is because we are currently on a road trip across the country. We're moving for the summer. I will have vlogs up soon that explain what's going on with that, but I just thought I'd explain that first. So let me actually scoot over here a little bit, that way I've got somewhere to put the pictures. But the first 4 books that I read were actually part of a series. I was finishing up the Secret series. So in order, I started with book number 2. My previous wrap-up would have talked about book number 1. But the first one, or the second one, so book number 2 is If You're Reading This, It's Too Late. Number 3 is This Book Is Not Good For You. Number 4 is This Isn't What It Looks Like. And number 5 is You Have to Stop This. So that's the names of the next, or the last 4 books in the Secret series. I gave If You're Reading This, It's Too Late 4 stars. I gave This Book Is Not Good For You 3.5 stars. This Isn't What It Looks Like 4 stars, and then You Have to Stop This 4.5 stars. So overall I'd say the series is kind of like a 4-star series for me. It's not like my end all be all, I love this and everybody in my life needs to read this series, but it is really good and I would recommend it to anybody who likes fun mysteries with like different codes and things like that, and that likes reading kind of younger aged books. Especially if you have kids, if you are a kid. I don't really know the age range of who all is watching this, but it's a good like middle reader, middle grade book. And basically, if you haven't seen me talk about the Secret series before, it's a whole series about these 2 kids who get wrapped up into this mystery, and there's a magician in their town that goes missing, and they set out to try and find where this magician has gone. And that's basically the whole premise of the first book. From there, it's kind of hard to talk about the plots without ruining it. In the next books in the series, they pretty much continue going through and looking for these mysteries. They, in the first book, you get introduced to a secret society that is kind of the main villains in the book series, and they just basically continue to fight these villains. They're the secret society in various different settings and ways throughout the series. So this first book is all centered around like this magician. The second book's kind of centered around learning some of the more of the backstory behind like the magician and the secret society that they're fighting against and kind of all of that. So you get kind of the backstory of where all this is coming from. The third book's a little interesting because it focuses entirely around chocolate, and basically the secret society that they're fighting against comes up with a plan surrounding chocolate. So the whole book's about chocolate, and This Book Is Not Good For You. This book, or This Isn't What It Looks Like, kind of picks up from where the chocolate book is, so you get a little bit of those themes still, but it's a little bit more medieval set. So it's kind of around medieval times, their schools goes to a medieval fair, stuff like that. And then the 5th book is based more around like Egyptian mythology. So you have like mummies and they go to an Egyptian museum and stuff like that. So all of them have kind of a different vibe going on within the books, but they're set within the same series. You have your same main characters, they're fighting the same secret society villains. I think my least favorite of the books is probably the one that's centered around chocolate, so that's number 3. I just feel like it kind of gets a little bit of a dip where you're not making a ton of progress as far as like the overall plot of the series. Like you still have a fun little mystery and they go through it and it's fun like that, but it's almost, I don't want to call it a filler book, but it's not super helpful as far as furthering along like the overall plot of what's going on. But it's still like a good book. So that's kind of the Secret series. It's, again, a fun one if you want like a cozy mystery that's at a lower reading level. Okay, then after that, I started reading a book for a video that I'm filming, so you'll see that coming out soon. but I read The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. I ended up giving that one 3.5 stars. And this one I had a really hard time deciding how to rate it. The thing that I'm struggling with is the writing's really good. Like objectively, if I were to rate it just for like the writing and how well she writes, it would be a much higher rating. But my interest level in the book brings it down quite a bit. I just didn't get hooked like I was hoping I would. I also feel like I got a little bit clickbaited by the back of the book and by like all the descriptions you see about this book everywhere. It's described like a thriller. Like I thought I was getting like a mystery book, and it's much more literary fiction than it is mystery. But basically the premise of what this book is, you have like, they call it like a book within a book. So you have this old lady and she's like the main point of view, and she is writing a journal kind of reflecting on her life and describing how her life was growing up. And then the second point of view that you get is a book that was written by her younger sister who died pretty young. And then when her sister died, she went and took this book and published it as like part of enacting her sister's will. So you get like a few chapters of this old lady's journal, you get a few chapters of the book, which is like a sci-fi book almost, and then you get interspersed like newspaper articles from their life. So you're basically getting these several point of views to understand kind of her family and what it was like growing up. The back of the book describes it almost like a thriller. Like it talks about how there's like this twisty, suspenseful ending that intertwines everything. And you get a little bit, I guess, of that, but it's not written like how you'd get that in a mystery. It's like, it takes you and it leads your hand so that you like get to the conclusion and the ending that it wants you to get to, but it's not like it just all of a sudden drops this whole thing and you're like, whoa, mind blown. You're like, I've kind of been guessing that all along, and it like leads you up to it. So you totally know the ending before she gets there, and the author even acknowledges that. Like you get to the ending and she says you probably have guessed, or like you probably have put these pieces together. There's like a couple parts where she is like, you probably kind of have inferred this, and it definitely like leads you there to the point where you're like supposed to guess. You're supposed to figure it out. It's not like the author's trying to hide it from you kind of a thing, which I think is really cool, and I think that I would have loved this book a lot more if the back of the book didn't make it sound like a mystery book. Again, I think her writing style is really good. I think she's a really great writer. I found myself wanting to annotate the book, which is not something that I usually do. I rarely, if ever, annotate books. There are quite a few quotes that I found myself underlining. So I think her writing is amazing. I just didn't connect with the story as much as I would have liked to, and I think I could have connected with it more had I known what I was getting when I went into it, but the back of the book made it sound like something different, so I just was like constantly waiting for when the mystery was just going to show up, and it never did, because that's not actually what the book was. So I don't know. I would recommend not reading the back of the book before you read this book, and just being able to let yourself enjoy the book for what it is, and I think you would like it a lot more than I did. I don't know that I recommend it to everyone. There is a little bit of language in there, nothing crazy, and there's a few, the like book that her sister wrote is supposed to be like the super scandalous like banned book, and so there are a few scenes in there that aren't like, they're not bad. For the time period that this is set in, they definitely would be like terrible. It's very much so like in between the two world wars, I think is when it's set. Just from like stuff that you get, I'm not 100% positive. It's in between two big major wars, because she goes through 2 wars in her lifetime. But I can see how it'd be scandalous then. It's definitely more of like a fade to black, things are like, you know what's going on, but it's not writing them super explicitly type of a book. So it's definitely more of an adult book, but it's not like terribly explicit. That's kind of the few things that held me up on this book, but I did really love the writing, and I do think she's an amazing author. Obviously she's super popular, but that's my thoughts on The Blind Assassin. The next book that I read, well I say I read, but I actually technically listened to it, is an audiobook. As we've been driving on this road trip, me and my husband have been listening to audiobooks to try and fill some of the time, and so the first one that we did is The Word is Murder by Anthony Horowitz, I think is how you say his name. Basically the plot of this book is that you have a detective who comes to an author and asks the author to write a memoir about him, essentially. But the weird twist about it is that this author is Anthony Horowitz. So he like puts himself into the book and he is one of the main characters, is like himself. So, and he like name drops pretty much everything he's ever done. He's listing off TV shows and books and things like that that he's like been involved in. So that's the interesting part. In addition to having this little like relationship of a author and the person or the detective that he's writing the memoir about, the memoir is basically him following the detective around a case. So you have this really interesting case where essentially this lady walks into a funeral parlor, and within the same day she gets murdered. And so you're solving this case, but you're also exploring like the relationship between the detective and Anthony Horowitz as the author writing about him. So it's this kind of fun twist on a murder mystery. I thought it was really good. I gave it 4 stars. It's a super fun mystery. I don't really have anything bad to say about it per se. It just wasn't like a I'm gonna recommend this to everyone absolute favorite book, which is why it's not a 5-star. I could honestly probably bump it up to 4.5. There was a little bit of language, but they're British, so it's kind of expected. I did think that they had a really good twist. I will say I guessed part of the ending, not all of it, but I guessed part of it. Like I kind of knew where I thought they were gonna go with it, but I definitely didn't get everything. I thought it did have a really fun twist there at the end. And it's a really fun lead up. There's lots of twists. It's a really fun, just like classic, quick murder mystery, which I do really love. It was a very nice break for me from some of the books that I've been reading that were a little bit longer, like The Blind Assassin. So I don't know. I don't really have a ton else to say about that. It's a murder mystery. You can't really say too much without spoiling what goes on in it. But I thought it was really fun little murder mystery. It breaks the fourth wall a lot because you have the author actually in the book, which was a fun twist on it. And then the last book that I read in May was Pedro Paramo. This one was also on my TBR for the month. I don't really know what to say about this book. I gave it 3 stars because I just honestly am so confused. It's a magical realism book, which is the main reason I'm so confused. But basically, this book is about a boy or a man who his mom dies and she sends him to like the village where she used to live. And he gets there and there's nobody there. And then over the course of the book you find out that everyone's dead, I think. And to be honest, I can't even tell if he was alive or dead throughout the whole book. But you're kind of piecing together the story of like several generations of this Paramo family in Mexico. And so it's like a classic. It's only 123 pages. It's definitely a short book, which I think is part of the reason it's still so confusing, is because it was so short that like you didn't really have time to develop stuff, but you did get to know the characters pretty good for it being so confusing. I think what I've decided is with magical realism, you either just have to accept that you're going to be confused and just enjoy it for what it is, or you're going to hate it, or you have to like really take your time to like get a reading guide and annotate and like tear it apart in order to understand what's actually happening. So you either just have to accept you're going to be confused, or you have to put in some major work in order to understand the plot. And I decided to just accept that I'm going to be confused and go that route, because I don't really understand fully what happened. I got a little bit. It's like the story of this town and how it went from like this prosperous town to a literal ghost town. I still am confused as to which characters were dead and which characters are alive. I'm not so sure that you're supposed to understand that though. Like I think maybe the whole point of the book is that you are not supposed to know who's dead and who's alive. So that's what it is. It is a really short book, so there's not as much like character development and stuff, but you did get to know the characters decently. And that's the only way you can tell the difference between the timelines is based off of which Paramo they are talking about. So you have Pedro Paramo, who's like the dad. They mention his dad at some point. And then you have the son of him, and then potentially another son. From what it sounds like, nobody really knows who his kids are because he kind of was all over and nobody actually knows who his children were. It's just like random people claiming that he's their dad. And so you have the one that he like accepted and raised as a son. And then you have the one who supposedly come back on instructions from his dead mother to find his dad, who is Pedro Paramo. So you have like multiple sons of Pedro going around. One of them is for sure dead because it like, one of the storylines is you learning about that son's death. So that one's Miguel, and you learn about his like whole storyline of his death and how it like impacts his dad, Pedro. And then you have the other one who, I think his name's Juan. I don't really remember. It's only mentioned like once or twice. I don't think you're really supposed to know his name. You can tell when it is that character because it switches to first person. So you have like the first person character, who I think is named Juan. And then you have the Miguel son, and then you have Pedro. And basically the whole story is trying to get you to understand like the story of Pedro, from what I got out of the book. That wraps up everything that I read in May. That makes it a total of 7 books. So I read 7 books. I had 7 on my TBR. Again, I didn't read one of them. I did read an extra one, which was The Word is Murder. So let's jump into now my June TBR. I'm going to carry over the one book that I didn't read in May into my June TBR, and that is Mistborn. I'm going to be getting into my first Brandon Sanderson. There are so many books out there. He writes a lot, and a lot of his books are massively thick. So this month my goal is to try and get through the whole Mistborn trilogy. I'm hoping now that it's summer, we only have another like week and a half. Yeah, another like week and a half left of our road trip. So hopefully at that point I'll be able to have a lot more time to just sit and read. I've got a couple flights going here. I do have a lot of traveling happening this month, and I have like my sister's wedding, and then my mom's coming out to visit us in North Carolina, and we've just got stuff going on. So I'm hoping that I can get through the Mistborn trilogy. That's my goal. I may be setting myself up for a lot of reading, but I think I can do it. We will see. So Mistborn, you got the 3 books, Final Empire, The Will of Ascension, and then The Hero of the Ages. So I have all 3 of them here with me on our road trip. I'm hoping I can try and get through as many of those as possible. I don't totally understand what Mistborn is about, to be honest, and most people pretty much just tell you that you have to read it to understand the plot because it's super complicated and the magic system is super complicated. But from what I understand, which is very little, there's some kind of war going on. The magic is based on like metals, I think, and that's pretty much it. But the next book that I'm planning on reading in June, I'm actually partially through, and this is the audiobook that we started when we finished The Word is Murder. It is Project Hail Mary. Basically what this book is a guy wakes up without his memories in space, and he's trying to figure out, and you basically find out that he's on this mission to save Earth from complete destruction, and he is trying to put together back his memories of what exactly it is that he's there for, why they sent him on this mission, why he has no memories, stuff like that. So it starts out very confusing. I don't want to talk too much about what the plot is because it kind of spoils a lot, but that's pretty much the basis of what you learn in the first chapter or 2. So we're probably maybe a quarter of the way through that book, so I'm hoping over the next few days, the next week as we're driving, we'll probably get through the rest of that book. So that one will be an easy one to finish. And then the last book, I know this is a lot of reading that I have on here, but the last book that I put on here is The ABC Murders by Agatha Christie. By the end of this month we will be halfway through the year, which is wild, and I have not read a single Agatha Christie. So I kind of have it in the back of my mind a goal that throughout my life I would like to read every Agatha Christie. This isn't like a goal that I have like a set deadline on that I'm trying to get done by a certain time, but I would love to read through all of her books, starting primarily with the Hercule Poirot books. He's definitely my favorite. I've read a handful, or like not a handful, like a couple books that are not one of her like set detectives, and I really like those too, and those are fun. And I've also read one Miss Marple. She's not my favorite. If you don't know like the Agatha Christie detectives, Miss Marple's like an old lady detective, and she basically seems to get most of her information through gossiping. So she's not like a thorough detective, she just like is a gossipy old lady who happened to solve a murder. At least that's how the book was that I read of hers, so she's not my favorite. She's like fun occasionally, but I do really like Hercule Poirot. He's a very fun detective and I really like him. So I have the ABC Murders, I've added that to my list. I have a feeling at some point I'm going to want a little bit of a break from the Mistborn trilogy and the massive amount of pages that go into that, so I threw that one in as a fun little quick thriller to kind of break things up, hopefully. But that is my June TBR, so I've got 5 books, but 3 of them are really long, so it should still be a lot of reading. But I think it's going to be a fun month. I'm excited to read these books. Look out for my wrap up coming up at the end of June, as well as some travel vlogs coming up of all of our road trip and some that I have backlogged that will hopefully be coming out soon. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some good recommendations out of it. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to know your thoughts down below. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.